We don't understand. We just don't understand how demonic these white supremacists are. We just don't fathom that.
The human subjects who would be Mengeler's guinea pigs were to be found at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. He obtained a posting to the camp and set about extending his anthropological research into heredity. Mengele was not the first doctor to use concentration camp inmates for research purposes. In Birkenwald and Dachau, Jews were injected with bacteria, exposed to all manner of deadly diseases, and struck with rifle butts repeatedly to see how long it would take for them to suffer irreversible brain damage. At Auschwitz itself, Dr. Horst Schumann had been conducting sterilization experiments, once castrating 90 men in a single day. Yet Mengele was to take the scope and barbarity of his experiments to an entirely new level. Auschwitz had been elected as the venue for his work because of its out-of-the-way location and because it was close to a railway junction with tracks coming from all over Europe. Mengele arrived at Auschwitz on the 23rd of May, 1943. The next day he participated in his first selection. This involved selecting which of the new inmate arrivals were to live and which were to die. On that day alone, he sent 1,035 gypsies to the gas chamber. As was his nature, Mengele was impeccably dressed during these selections. He wore a white SS medical uniform, white gloves, and polished black boots. His face was emotionless as he decided who was to die by a simple flick of his wrist. His constant chain-smoking and air of nonchalance presented a mystifying yet terrifying sight for the bewildered new arrivals. During his time at Auschwitz, Mengele oversaw selection on 74 transports. 80% of new arrivals were condemned to death immediately. All children under the age of 14 were killed, as were the old and the infirm. Mengele seemed to enjoy this aspect of his job, and he was known to say, "Here the Jews enter through the doors and leave through the chimney." Mengele's passion, however, was for scientific research. He instructed the guards to seek out those who were deformed, overly tall, midgets, or who were lame. His most prized subjects were twins, especially if they were children. From his earliest days at university, Mengele had a fascination with twins. He believed that by studying them, he could discover the secret to genetic manipulation. Indeed, it was his search for twins that motivated him to attend so many arrival selections. During his time at Auschwitz, he managed to find 1,500 pairs of twins that were used as human guinea pigs. Only 100 pairs survived. The twins and other research subjects who were selected on arrival would be marched to living quarters at the Birkenau, about 2 miles away. There they lived in appalling conditions, surrounded by rotting corpses and starving adults. Once established in their disgraceful living quarters, the children had to complete an intensive questionnaire in which they had to indicate their age, height, eye and hair color, ethnic background, as well as any health problems. Older children assisted young ones to complete the forms, desperate to have everything completed to the satisfaction of the guards. Children would then be interviewed by Mengele himself, who would take extensive notes and then have a file for each child drawn up. He was determined to have his research seen as legitimate, and so he went to great lengths to keep everything official. In preparation for experimentation, the children were cleaned, bathed, and dressed in clean pajamas. They were then taken by Red Cross vehicles to one of Mengele's research laboratories. He had established a number of labs around the Auschwitz-Birkenau area for these specific purposes. At one, blood tests and x-rays were taken. Here the children were treated with care. Mengele would come in regularly to make sure that none were being mistreated. On these occasions, he would hand out sweets to the children and talk gently and reassuringly to them. By doing this, he was able to engender trust, which got the children onto his experimentation table. In other labs, the most heinous barbarism was taking place on a daily basis. Anesthesia was never used, so the pain that was inflicted on the children can hardly even be imagined. Experiments included the removal of specific organs or limbs, immersion in freezing water, the injection of dyes into the eyes, the castration of boys, sterilization of girls, and deliberate infection of wounds with gangrene. Occasionally, Mengele would organize endurance test experiments. This involved subjects being given increasingly strong voltages of electricity until they either died, became unconscious, or went into a coma. As soon as a twin died, its sibling would immediately be killed in order to provide comparative data during the autopsies. Despite Mengele's attempt to cloak his work in legitimacy, there was no valid scientific reason for any of these horrendous experiments. Doctors who assisted Mengele later recorded that it seemed as if many of the experiments were just inspired purely by sadism. In addition to his diabolical lab work and to selection duties with new arrivals, Mengele occasionally delivered babies. Women who were found to be pregnant were immediately gassed. However, if they were near full term, Mengele would deliver the baby, only to be sent with its mother to death. One of his greatest amusements was to allow for them both to live for some time, but to tape the mother's breasts so that she would be forced to watch her baby starve to death. Of all of his atrocities, the worst occurred when he had a pit dug and a massive fire lit in the yard at Birkenau. He then had 300 children, all under the age of 5, thrown into the flames. Unlike the majority of Nazi killers, Mengele did not have to be drugged or drunk in order to carry out his murderous work. In fact, according to Jewish survivors who were forced to assist in the laboratories, he was enthusiastic in his infliction of cruelty. At times, his temper would flare and exhibit itself with sharp bursts of horror. On one occasion, he smashed an old man's skull open simply because he wanted to be on his son's work detail. Within the camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau, Mengele had unlimited power. This, combined with his natural sadism, turned him into a monster. He was often accompanied on his rounds by his female equal, SS guard Irma Gresser, a 21-year-old blonde beauty who was almost as depraved as he was. The two of them marched around the camp in immaculate uniform, the perfect Aryan couple. Mengele's hatred for the Jews knew no bounds. He would celebrate Jewish holy days such as Yom Kippur by ordering the gassing of 1,000 children. But his extreme prejudice could not prevent feelings of lust from arising within him on occasion when naked young women were paraded in front of him. On one occasion, a beautiful 15-year-old Jewish girl from Transylvania stood in front of him. Mengele was clearly aroused by the girl. Obviously torn inside, he had the girl selected for special experimentation. Over the next hour, he caused such deformity to her body that she resembled an old, decrepit hag. He then left her to die, having overcome his illicit lust. By early 1944, Mengele had taken to adopting a child. Invariably, the little boy would physically resemble him and would be dressed in a small white medical uniform. Mengele would walk around the camp, hand in hand with the child, providing him with sweets and toys. Within a month, the doctor would tire of the child and led him, still hand in hand, to the gas chamber. The crueler Mengele was in the conducting of his duties, the more respect he got in the Nazi hierarchy. In a report written at the end of 1944, Auschwitz camp commandant Rudolf Hess wrote that Mengele carried out all tasks given to him, often under very difficult conditions, to the complete satisfaction of his superiors, often using his little off-duty time to utilize the scientific material at his disposal to make valuable contribution to anthropological science.
We just can't fathom how deep the deprived mind of these people is. It's real heavy.